I never thought that coming home would end with the door locked in my face and my son watching in silence. I stood there with my suitcase, one that still had the airline tag from my trip to Arizona, where I'd gone to visit my sister for the first time in years. It was supposed to be a healing trip, a change of pace. I came back expecting nothing more than my warm kitchen, maybe a little dust, maybe a leak from that old faucet Jeremy never got around to fixing. What I got instead was Tessa, my daughter-in-law, shutting the front door of my own house before I could take a breath, and Jeremy behind her, not saying a word. I blinked at the door like it might open again if I waited long enough. It didn't. "Jeremy," I called softly, not wanting to cause a scene on the porch. I saw the curtains shift slightly. He was still there. He had to be. But all I got was silence. Not even the decency of a lie. The house behind that door was mine. Bought with the man I loved before cancer took him too soon. Every tile in that entryway had our story in it. Jeremy had taken his first steps in the living room. I could still hear the echo of his laughter when he used to run around the couch pretending to be a race car. And now here I was, nothing but a forgotten chapter. Tessa's voice came from behind the door like ice. "We need space, Marion. You agreed to let us settle in, and it's better if you stay with Lillian a little longer." I agreed. My heart slammed against my ribs. I never agreed to any such thing. "Jeremy?" My voice cracked now. "What's going on?" Still nothing. He didn't even have the guts to look me in the eye. I turned slowly, feeling the weight of 71 years and the betrayal of the only child I ever raised. My suitcase felt heavier with every step I took down the walkway. I didn't know where I was going yet. I just knew I couldn't stand on that porch one more second. It wasn't just a door that closed. It was a final, breath-stealing kind of silence. The kind you feel when someone who once held your hand as a boy now stands quietly while his wife erases you like a bad stain. I got in the cab and gave Lillian's address. My hands shook so badly I could barely text her to say I was coming early. She didn't ask why. Lillian never asked stupid questions. She just opened the door, hugged me tight, and handed me a cup of tea so hot it burned my palm. I didn't care. At least it made me feel something. "I left a key to the house with them," I whispered later, staring at the tea leaves. I thought I could trust him. Lillian sat quietly beside me. She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't need to. What do you call it when someone steals your home with a smile on their face, and your own child's silence backing them up? You call it betrayal. You call it a door slammed shut on a life you built with your bare hands. And that night, as I lay on Lillian's couch staring at her old popcorn ceiling, I made myself one promise. They may have shut the door on me, but they would regret ever thinking I wouldn't knock it down. Just 5 days earlier, I was standing in my kitchen, cradling a chipped mug of chamomile tea, watching the steam curl toward the ceiling like it always did around this time. The radio hummed low from the corner shelf, and everything felt normal, familiar, safe. I had no idea that somewhere across town, my own son was sitting in an office, handing over forged documents with my name on them. I just remember that morning being quiet. Too quiet. It was after breakfast when I noticed something odd. The folder I always kept tucked in the bottom drawer of my roll-top desk, the one with my mortgage documents, deed copies, and the refinance papers, was out of place. Not missing. Just shifted. I remember frowning, running my fingers along the papers. Some pages were slightly crumpled, others felt rearranged. But I didn't panic. Why would I? Jeremy had just visited the day before. He'd brought the kids over, asked to use the printer in my office. I even made him lunch. "Mom, you always make the best grilled cheese," he'd said, flashing that sheepish smile of his. The one that used to melt me. The one that made me forget every disappointment, every missed call, every birthday card that arrived 3 days late. So when I saw the drawer slightly ajar, I didn't think much of it. I should have. Instead, I shrugged it off, told myself I was just getting forgetful. Tessa always liked to hint at that, little comments here and there. "Maybe you should get a password manager, Marion. You're always forgetting things." Or, You sure you didn't misplace it? They were planting seeds, and I watered them with my doubt. I spent the rest of that day folding laundry, planning dinner, and organizing the garage. I didn't touch the desk again. I didn't think to double check, because I still believed my son would never hurt me. And I had no idea that just hours earlier, he had already filed a deed transfer at the county office, using my forged signature. Signed, notarized. Witnessed by a friend of Tessa's, no doubt. They were already preparing to make the house theirs. And I was in the kitchen, sipping tea, completely unaware. It didn't feel real at first. I walked into the bank with my little red folder tucked under one arm and a list of questions in the other. I just needed a simple statement on my mortgage balance. That's all. Nothing complicated. The teller smiled politely, typed a few things, then paused. That pause. It lasted too long. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She turned to her screen again, squinted like maybe she'd made a typo. "Mrs. Callahan," she said slowly, "it looks like you've already transferred ownership of the property. I'm afraid we can't give you those documents anymore." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She rotated the monitor slightly, like she was doing me a favor, as if showing me my own betrayal in grayscale would soften it. The words blurred, but the meaning was sharp. New owner. Jeremy Callahan, co-signer. Tessa Callahan. My name was gone. My fingers went cold. My breath caught halfway up my chest and stayed there. That's impossible," I whispered. The clerk's tone grew cautious. "Maybe you'd like to sit down with someone in legal services? If you have questions, we can direct you to—" "No," I said, gripping the edge of the counter. "This is my house. That property, my husband and I, he passed. We bought it together. I never signed anything." But even as I said it, I remembered the folder. The drawer slightly open. Jeremy asking for a favor. "Do you have your ID, Mom? I need it to fax something." I'd handed it over. Without thinking. "I want to speak to someone," I said, forcing the words through a throat that felt like it was closing. "Now." The woman nodded, clicking her headset, calling someone named Alan to the lobby. I sat down. Cold leather chair, cold tile floor, cold air vent humming above me like a lullaby meant to sedate me. They stole it. The words finally landed, like bricks in my stomach. My son forged my name. My daughter-in-law helped. They had planned it. I stared at the polished marble floor, at my reflection in the glass table, and all I saw was a woman who trusted too easily. A woman who just lost everything. It wasn't the headline that hurt. It was the photo. A mutual friend, someone I hadn't seen in years, sent me a message. "Tessa's throwing a housewarming? Thought that was your place." I clicked the link. And there it was. Tessa in a red dress, drink in hand, standing in front of the fireplace I used to decorate every Christmas. The mantel was covered in candles now, trendy and sterile, and just off to the left, half obscured but unmistakable, was the antique chest Thomas bought for me in 1985, our last trip before the cancer came. I'd left that chest in the upstairs bedroom. I hadn't even had a chance to pack it. It had belonged to me for 37 years. Now it sat like a trophy in Tessa's Instagram feed. I stared at the screen, numb, scrolling through the carousel of images. Strangers I didn't know, clinking glasses in my dining room. My floors, my walls, my history. One caption read, "To new beginnings and family legacies, clinking glasses, #ours forever." Ours. They didn't just steal my home. They were rewriting it. I closed the app. My fingers trembled. Not from rage. Not yet. It was something else. That deep, hollow kind of ache, like someone cracked a piece of your spine and expected you to keep walking. I left the borrowed apartment I'd been staying in and went straight to Ava's office. Ava, my oldest friend from high school, now a lawyer, had already pulled the records. She didn't say anything when I walked in, just slid a manila folder across the table and looked me in the eye. "It's fraud," she said plainly. She pointed to the signatures. "That's not your handwriting. That's not your notary. And this stamp?" She tapped a corner. "Fake. This whole thing falls apart under scrutiny. I stared at the paper. My name in slanted ink. My identity, warped. Can we fight it? I asked, my voice hoarse. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She nodded once. We will. In that moment, the grief shifted. It didn't disappear, but it made room for something else. Something that looked a lot like resolve. Lillian's condo was small and smelled like lemon polish and old quilts. Nothing fancy, but safe. The kind of place where silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like rest. She didn't ask for an explanation, just opened the door, hugged me hard, and said, "You're home here as long as you need." I hadn't cried yet. Not even when Tessa locked the door. Not at the bank. Not when Ava handed me that folder full of legal betrayal. But when I sat on Lillian's couch, the tears came quietly. Not the kind you sob out. Just slow, steady drops down my cheeks that I didn't even bother to wipe. I was good to him, I said, mostly to myself. He was just a boy when Thomas died. I did everything. I gave him everything. Lillian sat next to me, holding my hand. I could still picture Jeremy as a toddler, standing on a stool in our old kitchen trying to stir pancake batter. The same boy who'd sneak into my bed during thunderstorms, who cried the day I dropped him off for kindergarten. He used to call me his best friend. Now I was a threat to his wife's comfort, maybe to her control. I raised him in that house, alone. After Thomas passed, I went back to work 3 weeks later just to make the mortgage. I missed school plays, birthdays, my own doctor's appointments, so we could keep that roof, that kitchen, that stability. I painted that back fence myself, hammered in the garden border stone by stone. Every wall of that house held something I'd fought for. And now they drank wine in my dining room like I never existed. I don't want the house back just for the bricks, I said to Lillian. I want my name back. I want the truth on paper. You'll get it, she whispered. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that antique chest, Jeremy's blank stare, Tessa's smile. They thought I was finished. They didn't know me at all. The next morning, Ava called early. No small talk. I need you to gather anything that proves your routine. Mail, receipts, prescriptions, anything dated from before and after the transfer. They're going to claim you were incompetent. I felt the blood drain from my face. They already are, she added quietly. Later that day, I took the long bus route back through my old neighborhood. The streets looked the same. Familiar, boring, safe. But everything felt different. It felt like walking through someone else's dream of my life. At the corner near the old willow tree, I spotted Evelyn, my former neighbor from 2 houses down. She was out watering her rose bushes, just like always. She dropped her watering can the moment she saw me. "Marion," she gasped, walking toward me fast. "I didn't know. Are you okay?" "They said you moved." I blinked at her. "Moved?" She looked guilty. "Well, Jeremy told the HOA board you had some cognitive issues, that you decided to downsize, said it was safer that way." My jaw clenched. "And Tessa's parents?" I asked. "Are they still there?" Evelyn hesitated. "They moved in the day after you left." She didn't look me in the eye after that. I nodded slowly. Of course they did. That's when it clicked. The party. The antique chest. The swift silence. It hadn't been just theft. It was erasure. Tessa had wanted me gone so badly. She filled the space with her own family like I'd never existed. She always hated that I kept my wedding photos up, I murmured. "They're gone," Evelyn whispered. I saw them tossing things into black bags the morning after. Something in me snapped. Quietly. Not a scream, not a sob, just a clean severing of trust. If Jeremy told the world I was senile, then we would let the evidence speak. Every receipt, every bill, every memory I could dig up, they'd stack like bricks in my new foundation. Ava would build the case, and I would no longer beg to be remembered. I would demand it. I hadn't stepped inside St. Bridget's in over a year, not since the Christmas service where Jeremy forgot to pick me up. He said the kids were sick. But Tessa posted pictures of the family smiling in the pews that same evening. Still, I came now. I didn't know what I expected. Comfort, maybe. Or just something familiar that hadn't been ripped away from me. The church smelled the same. Candle wax, old wood, the faint scent of lilies from last Sunday's altar. I slid into the last pew, my body folding down like it was seeking shelter more than reverence. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Marion? Pastor Doug's voice was soft, but unmistakable. I turned. His face dropped when he saw mine. "We've been worried," he said, kneeling beside the pew. I heard, "Rumors! Are you all right?" I hesitated, then nodded. Getting there. I didn't give him details. I didn't have to. I could see it in his eyes. Someone had told him just enough. Enough to make him concerned, not enough to make him judge. "I'm fighting back," I said after a long silence. "Legally. I never thought my own son would let it get this far." Pastor Doug sat beside me, his hands folded over one knee. "Children aren't born selfish, they learn it." "From who?" I asked, not entirely rhetorically. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "If you need a character witness, someone who can speak to your memory, your independence, anything for court, I'll do it, without hesitation." That nearly broke me, not because it was a big gesture, but because it was the first genuine offer of help I'd had in weeks without conditions attached. "I might need that," I whispered. He patted my hand once, stood, and left me alone. The stained glass window above the altar cast long shards of blue and gold across the pews. I stared at them. This wasn't my first fight. I'd raised a child on my own, paid off a mortgage, buried a husband, beat cancer once, navigated grief more times than I could count. I knew how to endure. But now, I needed to win. Ava's office smelled like paper and urgency. She had that look she always got when something big broke in a case. Focused, sharp, no time for pleasantries. The kind of look that meant someone had just handed her a live wire. And she planned to light a bonfire with it. She didn't waste time. Tessa coerced him. The words hit harder than I expected. She slid a transcript across the desk. I spoke with one of Tessa's coworkers, someone who overheard a call. She threatened to take the kids, said she'd file for full custody if he didn't get the house in their name. Claimed you were unstable, that if he didn't act, the old woman will leave us with nothing. I didn't move. I just stared at the paper. The black and white proof that the person I raised had bent his spine so far backward for his wife that he let her erase me from my own life. "I always thought he was weak," I murmured. "But not cruel." Ava leaned forward. "She manipulated him. Legally, it doesn't excuse him. But you need to know, it wasn't all his idea." I nodded once, slowly. That didn't make it better. In some ways, it made it worse, because it meant he knew. He knew what was wrong, and still chose her over me. He knew I was lucid, capable. He saw me pay bills, manage medications, drive myself to doctor's appointments. And yet, when it came down to a choice, he handed over my legacy like it was a spare coat in the closet. "Will this help us?" I asked. Ava's voice was solid. "Absolutely. Coercion under duress strengthens the fraud case, especially when paired with a forged signature and a fake notary." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not in defeat, in clarity. They were beginning to corner themselves. Lies don't age well, and theirs were already fraying at the edges. I opened my eyes, looked Ava dead in the face, and said, "Let's finish what they started." I didn't realize how small I'd made myself, how quietly I'd been moving through life, as if staying silent might protect me, as if shrinking might earn me love. But grief is a strange mirror. It doesn't lie, it doesn't flatter, and it doesn't let you hide. I started walking, every morning, 2 miles around the neighborhood near Lillian's condo. Not for weight, not for health, for something else. Something inside me that needed forward motion. I brushed my hair differently, wore my nicer coat, the one I used to save for occasions. I made the library my second home. Not for books, for faces. For remembering what it felt like to talk to people who didn't look through me. There was a woman there, Maya, a retired nurse, who always smiled when I came in. We started chatting about nothing at first, weather, book returns, but every time, I felt a little more visible. One day, she said, "You carry yourself like someone who knows too much." I smiled for the first time in days. Maybe I've just learned the hard way what doesn't work. I got a new phone, a new email, quiet things, but they felt like armor. Ava noticed it too. "You look different," she said one afternoon, flipping through documents. "I feel different," I replied. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming space. The way I sat, the way I spoke, the way I stopped apologizing for existing. They wanted me erased. Instead, I was becoming more myself than I had been in years. And I wasn't done yet. The court clerk didn't even look surprised. Apparently, fraudulent property transfers weren't rare anymore. "Families do awful things," she said casually, stamping the intake papers. She slid the finalized form back to Ava like it was just another Tuesday. But to me, it wasn't just paperwork. It was my name, backed by truth, inked with intent. We walked out of the courthouse under gray skies. No rain, just that kind of damp air that makes you pay attention. In the car, Ava passed me a copy of the filing. We didn't request an emergency injunction. Too risky. They'd be tipped off. But we scheduled enforcement for next Saturday, Tessa's big event. "The party?" I asked. She nodded. "According to her PR site, it's their firm's 5-year anniversary. She's hosting at your house. Real estate execs, local officials, all of them invited." Of course she was. Of course she'd fill my living room with polished strangers and toast to her own ambition with my glassware. My silence hadn't shamed her. My absence hadn't haunted her. But my presence, legal, documented, undeniable, that would. I didn't smile. Not yet. That would come later. Instead, I held the court notice in my lap like a lantern in a dark room. "They're not going to see it coming," Ava said. I nodded slowly. Good. Let them clink glasses in stolen rooms. Let them laugh under borrowed chandeliers. They had 7 days. Then the lights would come on. The first call came at 8:12 a.m., unknown number. I let it ring. I blocked their numbers, but O knew exactly who it was. Then came the voicemail. "Mom, it's Jeremy. Look, something weird is going on with the insurance company. They flagged the deed, said something doesn't add up. And now the electric company is asking for new verification. I'm trying to fix it, okay? Just call me." I didn't. Not right away. The second call came at noon. Same number. This time, I answered. His voice was tight. That performative calm he always used when he'd already lit the fire and was pretending to help put it out. "Hey, Mom. Listen, have you heard anything weird from the bank or anything?" My tone stayed cold. "No." "Why?" He hesitated. "Our home insurance is freaking out. Said they can't verify Tessa's name. Then the utility company called. Something about a mismatch with the owner of record." I almost laughed. Owner of record. As if that wasn't me. As if they hadn't already stolen what they could and left my name behind like trash. "That's strange," I said flatly. Silence. "Mom," he faltered. "Could you help us out? Just temporarily. Float us, say, $5,000? We're dealing with some cash flow issues." Cash flow. I rolled the phrase around like a stone in my mouth. Gritty. Offensive. "Just to hold things together," he rushed. "Until this clears up, you know we're good for it." I let the silence drag out long enough for the air to feel heavy between us. "Let me think about it," I said. A beat passed. He was waiting for mercy. "Okay," he said, low. "Yeah. Thanks, Mom." He hung up without saying "I love you." Of course he didn't. I stared at the phone in my hand for a long time. Ava had warned me. They'll feel it before they understand it. when the systems stop recognizing their names, when the utilities start calling them strangers in a house that isn't theirs. Jeremy's voice wasn't angry anymore. It was scared. Not of me, not yet, but of the consequences snapping at his heels. The house he stole, the house they took, was rejecting them. And now, insult on top of injury, he was asking me to pay for the fallout. As if I owed him anything. As if the theft wasn't enough. This wasn't a family in crisis. This was a con falling apart. There was no we. There never had been. Just Jeremy, scrambling. Tessa, silent and hiding behind his lies. And me, sitting in Lillian's quiet kitchen, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of warm tea, watching the sun crawl across someone else's windowsill. Let me think about it, I'd said. But I didn't need to. The answer was no, and this time, it would stay no. The court clerk's voice came through the speakerphone like it was reading off a grocery list. But to me, it was scripture. Final ruling confirms the property deed was fraudulently transferred. Marion Callahan remains the legal and sole owner of the home at 812 Hearthstone Lane. Ava looked over at me and said nothing. She didn't need to. I reached for the pen. The paperwork was already laid out. 8 pages thick, printed on stiff white stock with official seals and headers that made my stomach twist and settle at the same time. These weren't just documents. These were the reversal of every humiliation I had swallowed in silence. Ava leaned forward. You sure you want to do this? I nodded. Sheriff's Department will serve the eviction in person, she said. We'll time it with the party. They'll be out in 24 hours. The folder sat heavy in my lap. Eviction. I never imagined I'd serve one to my own son. To the woman he chose over me. To the people who toasted under stolen chandeliers and slept in my husband's bed while calling me senile behind my back. I didn't pause. I didn't flinch. I signed every page. No tremor. No second guessing. When I reached the last line, I pressed my name into the ink so firmly the pen left a faint indent on the page below. Ava checked the signatures, then sealed the folder with a final clip. It's done. I looked out the window of her office. The city moved along as if nothing had changed. Cars crawled through the intersection. A woman pushed a stroller past a coffee shop. Life didn't pause for personal justice. But inside me, something had settled. Something that had been shaking for months finally stilled. I'm not angry, I said softly. Ava raised an eyebrow. Not in the way I thought I'd be, I clarified. I'm disappointed and tired, but I'm not here to destroy them. Ava studied me for a moment, then nodded. You're here to take back what's yours. And make sure they don't do it to anyone else, I added. We spent the next hour finalizing coordination with the Sheriff's Department. Ava sent over the timestamped documents, the judgment, the motion for public enforcement. It was all so quiet, so precise. Justice wasn't loud. It was methodical. It was patient. It waited until your opponent was pouring drinks in a house they thought they'd buried you under, and then it knocked. Ava leaned back and crossed her arms. Next Saturday, they'll learn what a signature is really worth. I nodded. But I wasn't thinking about the house anymore. I was thinking about the moment Jeremy would open that folder. The second he realized he hadn't just lost property, he'd lost me. And this time, he wouldn't be able to buy me back. I didn't knock. I walked straight through the open front gate, heels silent on the flagstone path. I laid with Thomas one summer, back when Jeremy still wore cartoon pajamas and followed us around like a shadow. The banner strung across the porch read, Callahan and Green Realty, 5 years of excellence. Music spilled out of the house like cheap perfume, synthetic and loud. There were strings of lights hung where my wind chimes used to be, and clusters of people laughing under paper lanterns. People who didn't know the ground they stood on was borrowed. Stolen. I wore gray. Not black, not red. Just a quiet, strong gray. The kind that absorbs attention instead of begging for it. Beside me, 2 uniformed deputies and the county court officer matched my pace without saying a word. They didn't need to. The sealed folders in their hands spoke louder than anything we could say. I didn't look around. I didn't scan for reactions. I looked only for him. Jeremy. He stood near the buffet table, half laughing at something some banker was saying, holding a glass of white wine. Tessa stood beside him, her back to me, wearing a sleeveless champagne dress that shimmered in the porch lights like she thought it made her untouchable. I stepped into the crowd. Conversations dulled. Not silenced, just faltered, tripped over the sight of me. The woman no one expected. The ghost in her own garden. Jeremy saw me before she did. And for a moment, I saw something in his face I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Pure, unfiltered fear. "Mom?" he muttered. I didn't stop. Didn't hesitate. I walked up to him, opened my purse, and handed him the sealed envelope. The court order. "This is for you," I said, calm as winter. He didn't take it. He just stared at it like it might burn his hands. One of the deputies stepped forward and gently pressed it into his chest until he took it by reflex. Tessa turned then. And her voice, always just a little too sharp, a little too performative, rang out above the music. "What is this? What the hell is she doing here?" I turned to the hosts, some middle-aged couple with property signs on their cufflinks. I handed them the second envelope, embossed with the county seal. "This is a formal notice," I said quietly. "The property you're standing in was never legally transferred. The deed was fraudulently filed. The home remains mine." Their mouths opened, but no words came out. The court officer stepped up, voice firm but professional. "This event is now considered an unlawful occupancy gathering. You have 24 hours to vacate. This home is under immediate civil enforcement of court restitution." Tessa's parents froze mid-toast. Someone dropped a glass behind me. A man coughed awkwardly and backed away toward the archway. I watched Tessa's smile curdle. She lunged toward me. "You crazy old—" The deputy blocked her with one arm. "Ma'am," he warned, "do not escalate." Jeremy's hands were trembling now. He flipped open the folder and scanned the front page. I watched his lips move as he read. "Final restitution order. Hearthstone property fraud. Case hashtag C205. "This is a mistake," he said, barely audible. The court officer didn't look at him. Instead, he looked at me. "Ms. Callahan," he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, "do you require police assistance in enforcing this order?" I met Jeremy's eyes and said, very clearly, "Yes," gasps. "Real ones. The kind that come from mouths that don't know how to process what they're seeing. The kind that fill a room faster than smoke." Tessa looked around, frantic. "You can't do this. We live here. This is harassment. Jeremy, say something." But Jeremy didn't speak. He was still holding the folder, still standing in the home he helped steal. The guests began to shift, gathering their things, murmuring apologies that weren't meant for me. They weren't sorry for what had happened. They were sorry they'd been there to witness the reckoning. I stood in the center of it all, the woman they'd erased, the memory they thought they could paper over with charcuterie boards and cheap wine, and I didn't flinch. Tessa didn't just snap. She unraveled. "This is insane," she screamed, trying to push past the deputy. "She's lying. She forged the documents. This is elder abuse. Do something." But the deputy didn't budge. He didn't raise his voice either. That's what made it more terrifying for her, I think. He stayed calm, professional. "Step back, ma'am." She looked to Jeremy, wild-eyed. "Jeremy, say something. Stop this." But he couldn't. He stood there paralyzed, folder in hand, mouth slack, eyes jumping across the words like they were written in a language he'd never learned. The court officer raised a hand for silence. It fell over the room like fog. He held up the stamped court order, turning slightly so both the guests and occupants could hear him. "This property," he said, reading from the top, "has been returned to Marion Elaine Callahan as the sole legal owner. The prior deed, filed in April, was proven to be fraudulently executed. Signatures were forged. notary documentation was falsified. Tessa's father set his drink down with a soft, defeated clink and backed away from the group. Tessa's mother stared at me like I'd just walked out of a grave. I almost wanted to ask them, was it worth it? Was all this deception, this manipulation, worth one night of twinkling lights and catered hors d'oeuvre? But I stayed silent. Let the ruling speak louder than I ever could. Tessa let out a choked sob and grabbed the folder from Jeremy's hands. She tore through the pages like she could rip the truth apart with her manicured nails. "This is garbage!" she shouted. "My lawyer will destroy this in court. This woman doesn't even have a job." The court officer didn't flinch. He merely reached into his briefcase and pulled out the second official copy, holding it up without speaking. The seal caught the porch lights, glinting like a warning shot. Tessa let the pages fall. They fluttered down around her feet like dead leaves. I turned to Jeremy. His eyes finally met mine. And I swear, in that 1 second, I saw the little boy he used to be, before the greed, before the excuses, before he decided loyalty could be traded for comfort. "I didn't think you'd go through with it," he whispered. I almost smiled, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "You never thought I'd stop letting you walk over me." He looked away, coward to the end. The guests were leaving now, most of them quiet, embarrassed. A few nodded at me in that awkward, guilty way people do when they've just realized they were part of something rotten. The court officer closed his folder. "We'll return tomorrow at 7 p.m. for confirmation of vacancy." Tessa turned toward me, her voice sharp again. "You'll regret this. You think you've won, but—" The deputy raised a hand. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you're trespassing." That shut her up. I stood on the porch, watching them all scatter, watching Jeremy lower himself onto the steps like a man watching his own house burn down. Which, in a way, he was. But the flames weren't mine. They were his. The court officer had just finished reading the final clause. Failure to vacate will result in mandatory removal, when one of the deputies stepped slightly to the side and lowered his voice. "Miss Callahan," he said quietly, so only I could hear, "do you want to pursue criminal charges?" I knew what he meant. I could. Forgery, fraud, elder coercion. At least 3 felony-level charges, each of them real, each of them punishable with real prison time. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel it. The choice, the weight of restraint. I turned slightly and looked at them. Tessa, still arguing under her breath, flipping through the court papers like they might somehow rearrange themselves. Jeremy, hunched now, not moving, staring into his lap like a man who'd misplaced the rest of his life. They looked smaller than I remembered, like all that power they'd pretended to hold had slipped through their fingers and left nothing but confusion and resentment. I took a breath, then shook my head once. "No," I said, "let them live with what they've done." The deputy nodded but didn't move. I added, softer this time, "I don't need bars to make them small." The words came out steady, clean, because they were true. Punishment wasn't the goal. Truth was. Let the neighbors talk. Let the story circulate. Let every person who toasted in that house now remember the woman who walked in with the law behind her and didn't raise her voice once. Tessa would spend every holiday wondering who still respected her. Jeremy would spend every late night wondering why his mother had gone quiet after so many years of pleading. And I would sleep, not for revenge, for peace. The court officer gave me a nod of finality, then began coordinating departure plans with the deputies. Guests continued trickling out, heads down, conversations hushed. And still, Jeremy hadn't moved. He just sat there. So I stepped toward him. Not close, just enough. When he looked up, I didn't see a son anymore. I saw a man who had gambled on my silence and lost. "I would have given you anything," I said quietly. "All you had to do was ask. But you stole it, and now you can never have it back." He opened his mouth. Maybe to apologize, maybe to lie. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and walked down the porch stairs. My heels clicked lightly on the flagstone. I didn't look back. Behind me, the law was closing the night. In front of me, the rest of my life waited. Not as a victim, not as a mother aching for her son to love her again, but as a woman who had finally remembered the sound of her own voice and used it. I didn't go inside. Not yet. I stayed in Ava's car, parked across the street with the engine off, the windows slightly cracked. From this angle, I could see everything: the front porch, the sheriff's cruiser, the soft orange glow of the porch light I used to replace every winter. Now it flickered, dim, impatient, as if the house itself was tired of waiting. Jeremy and Tessa had 24 hours to vacate, but they didn't even last 12. Maybe it was the shame. Maybe it was the looming threat of a second, public confrontation. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because they finally realized they couldn't spin this into anything noble. Couldn't pretend it was a misunderstanding. Couldn't twist the story into some noble sacrifice for their children. They packed fast, sloppy. Ava and I watched the process unfold like an awkward play. Boxes carried out with no lids, clothes thrown into trash bags, two men from Tessa's firm trying to quietly slide furniture into a rental van without meeting anyone's eyes. A sheriff's deputy stood near the steps, arms crossed, neutral, present, not angry, not gloating, just making sure the law stayed the loudest voice on the property. At one point, a few neighbors appeared on their lawns, pretending to check sprinklers or bring in trash bins. But their eyes lingered, and their silence was louder than gossip. Jeremy moved slower than everyone else, almost like he couldn't believe his body still worked. He walked out carrying that antique chest. My chest. The one Thomas bought me. The one Tessa had flaunted in her photos. Jeremy set it down beside the curb and stood over it. Just stood there. I didn't move, didn't call out, didn't tap the window. I let the moment do what it needed to do. I could see his shoulders heaving now, crying. But not for me, not for what he did. He was mourning comfort, access, the loss of convenience, disguised as family. Tessa emerged next, dragging a suitcase with a broken wheel, her hair pulled back, her face drawn tight. Her eyes flicked toward the car once, just once. I didn't blink. I didn't wave. She looked away. The sheriff gave a short nod to Ava. "Property's clear." Ava nodded back, then turned to me. "You ready?" I shook my head once. "Not yet." She didn't press me. Instead, she started the car, turned on the heat, and waited. Jeremy slumped onto the curb, head in his hands, sitting beside a box labeled "Family Photos." I wondered which photos had made the cut, which ones Tessa had let survive, which parts of me he'd tried to pack without realizing they didn't belong to him anymore. The house stood behind them, quiet, still, waiting. I would return soon. But not while they were there. Not while the shame still hung heavy in the air. No, I would wait until the house had exhaled, until the keys were mine again, until the silence was clean. So I sat there in Ava's car, under a dark sky broken by the occasional street lamp and the sound of a man losing everything, quietly, publicly, completely, and I didn't look away. The lock clicked the way I remembered. Soft, deliberate, respectful, like the house knew I had returned and didn't want to startle me. It was just past dawn when I stepped through the front door. No deputies, no neighbors, no Jeremy, no ghosts, just me, and silence. But this silence wasn't the kind that suffocates. It was sacred.